All right, we're rolling. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to lecture. Today we'll be covering UI collection views. So I guess let's jump right into some announcements. So if you guys saw yesterday, I released the repositories for A3. So if you guys did request a new partner, you guys have been assigned to a new partner. And if you do want to change a partner or not work alone anymore, please let me know as soon as possible because I can still change the repository before you make any edits. Just make sure you let me know before break if you still want a partner or change your current partner. But keep in mind, there are going to be two submissions for A3. We have a midpoint submission as well as a final submission. So the midpoint submission is going to be right after break, that Tuesday on April 9th. And keep in mind, that is just a completion grid, as I mentioned in the EdStem last night, if you saw. It's going to be counted for completion. However, it may be a good idea to get some of the assignment done because we will be giving feedback if you request it. So if you have any debugging issues or just any conceptual errors, we can help you with those if you submit something for the midpoint. So there will be nothing you'll actually need to submit for this assignment. For this midpoint check-in, you just have to make sure you push your changes to the GitHub, and we'll be checking them manually directly from GitHub, so there's no worries there. And keep in mind, start as soon as possible, because this is the heaviest assignment of the course. A4 is actually easier than this, so keep in mind, start early and manage your time wisely. So, just a bit of a recap from last lecture. So one way we can create a scroll view that contains multiple instances of copies of data is using a UI table view. So the steps to create a table view consist of creating UI table view cell first, and then make sure when you're doing that, you use the content view. Otherwise, the view itself does not exist in a UI table view cell. To make sure you register the cell by using the reuse identifier, which is essentially a string that represents the identifier that you want to use when you're dequeuing a cell. So this string can be anything, but the general convention is that you want to use the name of the actual cell plus the word reuse after it. And then next, you need to set the delegate as well as the data source. So we showed that in last lecture, but again, today when we're going over collection views, you'll see a similar process. So if you guys didn't quite get setting up the delegate and data source from last lecture, it's going to be relatively similar this lecture for collection views as well. So yeah, any questions? Okay, let's jump right in.
Cool. Hey guys, I hope you guys have been having a good Wednesday, and I know break is coming up soon, so hopefully everyone wraps up the week well. To get started with, similar to last time, we're going to start with a kind of a more conceptual overview of our topic today, which is UI collection views, and then we'll dive into how to actually implement one. So firstly, last time we went over how we could create these like row-like structures with table views, right? You could have a Spotify playlist where the table essentially consists of a bunch of rows that went down sort of in this vertical spanning motion. And this time we'll be discussing another way that we can lay out views, which is what we call using a UI collection view. So to make this make more sense, we have some screenshots here of apps that follow this sort of collection view layout. So first of all, the first difference that you'll notice with collection views is that they can also span in columns. So with table views, note that they were only spanning like row by row, so you could only scroll a table view vertically. But if you have had any interaction with Spotify, you'll know that you're able to scroll left and right, I guess horizontally on these collection views here. So this would be one collection view, and this would be a second collection view, and etc. So similarly on the right, we have an Instagram layout. Notice that for a table view, you essentially only be able to do like this left column and be able to scroll down. But in a collection view, we introduced this functionality that allows you to be able to also create these columns, right? So you have these rows and you also have these columns. And in a collection view, we refer to these individual things as items. So this would be item 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and again, they are also zero index. So we start with 0 rather than 1. Okay, so I guess let me go back. Importantly, if you take a look at some of these annotations, a big note for a collection view is that we have this more flexible layout, right? So we could use a collection view to build the same list and table-like structure. So realistically, if you think about it, like you could just have one column and it'd basically be a table view. Does that make sense? But you can't have the converse. So you can't use a table view to build this type of structure. Does that make sense? Okay, and we also have to set up this UI collection view cell. So if you recall from the lecture on Monday, we have to set up a UI table view cell. But in this case, we're setting up a UI collection view cell that represents each of these items. So for example, similarly, this would be one cell, this would be a second cell, and etc. And before we can even set up the actual, the actual layout of the collection view, we have to also individually set up the cells. So that would entail, like for example, in this case, it'd be like the image of the artist, the label is here, maybe this label, and so on. Any questions in terms of collection, I guess just conceptually? Cool. So let's dive a bit deeper into how to set this up. So first, like I mentioned earlier, we have to create the cell. So this is each of the items, right? And when this happens, I guess, maybe I can draw a little bit again. So there's sort of two steps. So you have this, I'll use like that Spotify example. So you're scrolling like this way, right? So the scroll is this way. And let's say this box is your collection view and this entire thing is your screen. So when you have a cell, so let's say this is one cell, and so on, you can have like an image, you have some words. So the first thing you have to do is create what we actually want this cell to look like. So before we can even get to this entire overarching structure, we have to be able to first create these individual cells. And we also have the same concept of dequeuing. So you can imagine for like Spotify or any other applications where there's a bunch of data, so you can have a bunch of playlists here. You wouldn't want to like, load up your memory and like try to be able to load all of these. Like you can imagine there's a million more cells here. You only want to load what you're seeing. Does that make sense? Like there's no point in loading like what the user isn't seeing. So we'll go over how to dequeue a collection view cell. And since we've already covered how to set up a cell last time, the idea is similar. You just create a UI collection view cell subclass, you subclass it, and then you initialize it, and you go through the whole motion of setting up a label, image, and whatever you want inside the actual cell. And then if you look at the demo code today, we'll already have that set up for you. So in this lecture, this demo, we'll only go over the differences in setting up the overarching collection view structure. Does that make sense? Okay. So I guess we can get started with that.
Okay, yeah, so we're going to jump right into the demo, and if you guys were here at last lecture, this demo should be relatively similar. There's just some minor differences between the UI collection view and the table view. So if you go to the course website, you can actually clone today's lecture demo. If you go to collection view, go here, and then, so if you see, click this link, if you click clone and then paste that into your terminal, you should be able to clone, and you should start off with sort of this code, like right here. You can just make that bigger. Is that good? Okay, a little bit more. All right, so if we take a look at this demo code, so you guys, when you do pull this from the GitHub and you clone it, you should get the same code here, where we have sort of this basic setup. We have, again, our bird data source right here, where we want to present our data in the form of a collection view this time. So again, we really just have like the stubs here. But however, this time, we're not going to cover too much detail into how to actually create the collection view cell itself. If you see here, it's pretty similar to the table view cell, except that if you note here, the initializer is just slightly different. So honestly, in terms of setting up the cell, the collection view and the table view are basically identical, except for this initializer here. And you can see before, we did not have a configure, but we also have this configure function here, which essentially allows us to take a bird and convert it into a cell by allowing us to set the image on the cell as well as the text. So again, like from last lecture, we have a UI image view and a UI label within these cells. Okay, so we're going to jump right into implementing our collection view this time. Okay, so like any other view, so like we did with table views before, a UI collection view is also a view. So what we need to do is start by defining a constant, or actually in this case, we need to define a variable. So the setup is slightly different. We can't really just directly call the constructor outside of view.load. What we actually want to do here is merely place a placeholder indicating that we have a collection view. So we have a private variable. Keep in mind the var is important here. We need to define a variable because we want to set this later on when we call view.load. And we want that to be of type UICollectionView. And this is one of the rare cases where you can actually force unwrap this because we don't want to define a initializer with a collection view in it. So in this case, we can promise Xcode that we're going to have UICollectionView later on. And this is one of the scenarios where you can actually safely unwrap this because you know later on when you're creating the collection view, you're going to be setting this variable later on. So what you do is essentially set a variable with a promise that there's going to be a collection view there later on so that Xcode doesn't get mad at you when it suddenly crashes. Okay, so like before, we want to define a function to set up our views. Set up collection view. And then we want to immediately call it here so we don't forget later, so that whatever we define in this function is actually called. So unlike a previous step, there's an extra added step in defining a collection view, and that is creating a layout. So let's define a variable called layout, and we're going to call the constructor called UICollectionView flow layout. So if you see this constructor right here, press enter on that. So this is what we're essentially doing is before we create the collection view, we actually want to create the layout for it. We want to set it up and establish some parameters with this layout. So one of the first things we want to do is set the scroll direction. So we can set layout.scroll direction, and then you can set that equal to, if you click dot, you'll have many options. So essentially this is of the class .collectionView.scrollDirection, which is a class in and of itself, but Xcode allows us to use a shortcut by allowing us just to use the dot, and we can see that there's two options. In this case, we want our collection view to be vertical, so we want to scroll vertically. And then we also have to set up the spacing. So this, rather than a table view where there's, if you remember from last lecture, there wasn't really any spacing between the cells. This time around, we can actually establish spacing between the rows as well as each of the items within the cell. So we have two sort of spacings we can set. So one of them is called the interline spacing, or the minimum line spacing. So this is the spacing between each of the rows. So if you imagine a collection view, you have perhaps maybe 2 cells per row, and you have multiple rows. So this minimum line spacing specifies the spacing between each of those rows. So let's just set that to 16. We also have something called the minimum inter-item spacing. So this is the spacing that within each row you have 2 items, let's say. So between those 2 items, you also have spacing in between. So when you're looking at the row, there's also inter-item spacing, which is the spacing between each item of a row. And I'll go over this again once we define this app, so you can more clear on how we can define this. Okay, so now that we have this the layout set up, we actually go and define our collection view. So what we're doing now is taking our variable here that we promised before that we have a collection view, and now we want to create the collection view in the set of collection view function. So you can see that the collection view constructor is actually different. There actually is parameters that are required. So this is the reason why we can't directly call it outside here, because we don't have access to the frame nor the UI collection view layout here. So this is why we need to sort of promise Xcode that we need a UI collection view, and later on we set it here by calling the constructor here and setting that variable back to the UI collection view. So in this case, since we are defining the constraints later on, we actually can just set our frame to .0, because when we go back and constrain them, it's going to make the frame correctly. So actually you don't need to specify a frame. But in terms of the layout, you want to specify the layout that you just created. So you can set the collection view layout to layout. Okay, so before we go into registering and setting up the cell like the table view we did, let's just add the view like any view. So we can add the sub view to our base view. So add the collection view. And don't forget the crucial step of setting translates auto-masking constraints into false. Otherwise, your view will not show up. And then we can lay it out by counting layouts. And it's layout constraint. Activate, create the list, and let's constrain this real quick. So again, like before, we want to constrain the collection view to the bounds of our screen. So let me just go through this real quick. So collection view dot top anchor dot constrain. We want to set that to the view's top anchor, and then dot bottom anchor. we want to set it to the constraints of the bottom anchor. So you can see the auto completion on Xcode is very helpful because I actually don't need to type out everything. I can just type like literally the first 3 words and press enter, and it will actually autofill everything for me. Dot trailing anchor dot constraint dot equal to view dot trailing anchor. Okay, so as you can see, we've set the constraints of our collection view to be the top, bottom, leading, and trailing of our super view. So now that we've done that, so the next step is actually setting up the cell. So if you remember from the table view lecture, in addition to constraining and setting the properties of our collection view, we also need to register the cell as well as the delegate and the data source. So what we can do here is after we define our collection view here, we can do CollectionView.register. So again, what we're doing here is essentially saying that we want this cell class to represent whatever cells are going to be in our collection view. So what we want here is actually to plug in this bird collection view cell class that we have here, plug in the name here. So what we want to do here is our collection view cell has to be of the class bird collection view cell. And if you want to specify the type of the class, we actually want to use .self. So rather than using an instance, we're using the actual class itself because this is what represents each individual cell in our collection view. And again, we have our US identifier, and this is important later on when we're dequeuing our cells, because when we're dequeuing them, we need to identify them as a specific cell so we can use the properties within that cell. So you can see we defined it last time, but this time we already have one sort of defined here for you guys. So it's right here, and it's, keep in mind, it's a static variable, so we can access it directly through this class instance. So we can do to access that is bird collection view cell dot reuse. So because we define that as static, we can actually directly access it through the class name like this. Okay, so after that, the next 2 steps that we have to do is define the delegate as well as the data source. So CollectionView.delegate is equal to self, and CollectionView.dataSource is also equal to self. So again, as you can see from last time, again, we're going to get these 2 errors because our current view controller does not conform to these protocols. So we have the delegate protocol as well as the data source protocol. However, since we only are of subclass UR view controller, we actually have not implemented these protocols. So what we want to do is we want to create an extension of our class to these protocols. So again, how you do an extension is using the keyword extension followed by the name of the view controller, which is just view controller, and then colon followed by what we want to extend it to. So the first thing we want to do is send it to the UI collection view delegate. Yeah, there's a lot of options, but make sure you get UI collection view delegate. And then for now, we're not going to do anything here because we're not sort of implementing any interactivity here. So unlike the table view cell, we had a function that we can define here, which was for the height of the cell. But in this case, since the sizing of the cells are sort of dynamic and more fluid for the UI collection view, we don't actually need to specify them in here yet. So let's just specify the data source. And we want to extend it to the UI collection view data source. And however, when you type this in again, like the table view, we have 2 required functions that we need to define here. So we have our cell for item map. So keep in mind, it's not cell for row at because each of the rows or items in the collection view is called an item. So if it's UI table view, it'll be cell for row at, but for collection views, it is cell for item at because each cell is not limited to a row. It is limited to an item in this case. And again, like before, we have number of items in section in, which specifies the number of items that we want to display within each section of the collection view. However, this time we're only using one section because again, we don't really have multiple cells that we want to use. So because we want to display a bird for every single cell, we want to use the total count of the bird data here as the total number of cells that we need. So again, we can go here and return the actual number we want. So we can return birds.count, which specifies that we want X number of items here for the number of cells that we have, since each bird correlates to 1 cell on the collection view. Okay, so now that we've done that, so does anyone remember the first step we have to do here? So we can't really create infinite cells. So in order to create a cell, we need to first what? Does anyone know? Okay. You guys should know this. So the first thing you need to do is define a variable, and we want to dequeue the cell first. So keep in mind, you don't have infinite memory. So in order to create a new cell, you need to dequeue an existing one with the existing properties. So that is exactly why we sort of set the reuse identifier is so when we are dequeuing them to create new cells, we know which type of cell to use. So yeah, so what we can do here is set this equal to CollectionView dequeue reusable cell. So essentially what we're doing is we want to create a new cell, and in order to do that, we need to dequeue an existing one that we're not using. So again, you'll see like before, we have the reuse identifier as well as the index path, and we could directly use that same reuse identifier. So bird CollectionView cell dot reuse, and we want to plug in the index path, so we can just copy this variable here and paste that there. So this specifies whatever index we want our item to be at. Okay, so as you can see, we're missing a return for the UICollectionView cell. And also keep in mind, because this is a CollectionView cell, we actually want to cast it to the specific cell that we want. So what you can do here is using the as keyword followed by a question mark, which safely allows us to cast it. We want to cast it to a bird CollectionView cell. Because keep in mind, dequeuing reusable cell returns a normal UICollectionView cell. But in this case, we want our custom cell. So we want to cast it using the as keyword. But in this case, if you can see, if we directly return cell, again, we'll get an error because cell is optional. So again, we want to unwrap this. So last time we used an if-let statement. This time we're going to change it up a little bit and use a guard-let. So again, you can use a guard-let and if-let essentially in the same sort of way, but this time we sort of need an else statement to specify what we want to do in the case that this is not satisfied. So in the case that it is satisfied, we just directly return cell, so we have no problem there. But in the case that this does not work out, so you can think of this guard as essentially a shield or a guard against the rest of the code. So if whatever here is not satisfied, we want the code to actually execute within the else block rather than continuing here. So you can do here is return a UICollectionView cell, just in the case that we are unable to cast our CollectionView cell to a bird CollectionView cell. So in addition to that, because so far we've dequeued an existing UICollectionView cell and we've cast it to a bird CollectionView cell. However, we still haven't specified what information we want in our cells yet. So that requires us to call the configure function, like I described before, which, as you can see here, it takes in a bird object and sets the image view as well as the text label within each of the cells. Okay, so if you go back to view controller, so since this is a bird CollectionView cell, we can directly just access that configure function. So cell.configure. You'll see that there. And we want to configure this with the bird at that specific index. So what we can do is use the bird's data source and then use index path. And since index path is actually not an integer, this will give us an error. So in order to access the value at that row, we have to use indexPath.row, which actually allows us to give the integer at that index and grab that specific cell there. Okay, so I think that's it for the data source. However, there's one extra step that we need to do if we want to specify the specific sizing of a UICollectionView. So we've set the delegate, which we're not using in this lecture, and we've set the data source. But there's also something called, as you can see here, the UICollectionView delegate flow layout. Yeah, so the names get longer and longer, but essentially we want to extend that again to this protocol. So view controller, we want to extend it to UICollectionView delegate flow layout. That's a very long word there. Yep. So you see there, again, we have no mandatory functions that we need to implement here, but there's something we want to specify, which is the size. So if you just type in size, you'll see here that we have this function in CollectionView called CollectionView size for item map. So this allows us to specify the size of each cell that we want to implement. And here, if depending on how many cells you want per row, you might have to do some logic here. So what we can do here, let's say we want our padding on each side to be 8. So let's say, let's first grab the size of the actual view. So what we can do here is let size is equal to CollectionView, which is the collection view here. And we actually want to get the width of the collection view. Since we want to have, let's say, 2 cells per row, we want each of the size of the cell to be half the width of the collection view. So what we want to do here is access the frame, as well as grab, and from the frame, we can grab the width of the collection view. And then because we want 2 cells per view, we want to divide that in half to get 2 separate cells per row. Because the entire collection view is, let's say, a certain width, we want each cell to be half of that width. But also keep in mind we have this inter-item spacing, which is 16. So keep in mind we also need to subtract the 16 because we want that spacing there as well. So the actual size of each cell should be half the size of the collection view. minus the inter-item spacing, which is 16 there. So once we define that, this is just a variable indicating the size, we can sort of return. So you can see that this function wants us to return a CG size. So you can directly call that constructor called CG size, and we have these sort of two parameters from this constructor function with the width and the height. And here we can just directly plug in size for both, because let's say we just want square cells. So in this case, the height and the width should be the same, where the width is exactly half of the collection view width. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's try running this. Any questions before while we're waiting? Okay, next. Okay, so as you can see, we have these sort of two cells right now. So if you were to use a table view, you would only be restricted to one cell per row. However, this time we're using a collection view. We can specify the inter-item spacing. So these images are white, so there's a little bit white space between the actual icon and the edge of the image, but there is 16 lines of spacing here, and there's also 16 lines of spacing here. So that is what the sort of inter-item as well as inter-line spacing is specifying here. So when we're setting the layout, we have the minimum line spacing as well as the minimum inter-item spacing. So if we go back here, the minimum inter-item spacing is this spacing sort of right here. And then the inter-line spacing is the spacing between each of those rows, which is specified between the birds Elvis and Jennifer. Okay, so I guess that's really about it with collection views. It really isn't too much of a difference. Just the fact, I'll just like reiterate sort of the differences here. So the first thing is you directly cannot call the UICollectionView constructor outside of the viewDidLoad function. So you can't actually just call UICollectionView like that because that constructor does not exist. What you need to do is promise Xcode that this variable will be a collection view later on. And later on in your viewDidLoad, you call setUpCollectionView, which creates a UICollectionView flow layout, which is sort of the structuring of the collection view that specifies the scroll direction as well as the spacing. And then in that setup function, you also create that collection view, thereby satisfying the promise. So this will actually never give an error because we're always satisfying the promise that the collection view exists because we're calling this function. And after that, the process is basically the same as the table view. We're registering the cells, setting the delegate, as well as the data source. And in our data source, again, we have the same sort of functions where one specifies the number of items that we want, and the other specifies how we want to configure, as well as what kind of cells we want. So this is sort of similar to the same table view lecture we went last time. And then last but not least, if we want to specify the cell size or just the sizing of the collection view cells, we have to use this size for item at function, which only appears in the UICollectionView delegate flow layout, which is again another protocol we want to use to sort of specify the constraints of our collection view. And again, in this function, if you want three per row, you would use the number 3 here, but and rather than 16, we can specify 32 because there's 3 items, there's 2 spaces between each of those items. And keep in mind, each of our spacing is 16, so now we want to subtract 32 if we want 3 items per row. So if we did that and run it, you'll see that we now have 3 items per row. So again, if you mess around with the sizing logic for each of the cells, it will sort of allow us to have sort of different dynamic cell heights and things like that. Sort of is more, there's more room for flexibility for the cell sizes for collection views. So generally, you'll probably find yourself using a collection view way more often because there's just a lot more fluidity with it. So again, like if you can keep like modifying this logic, we can have 4 cells per row or however many you want. But yeah, so that should be it for this lecture. Let me just go back to the slides. You want to finish up?
Yeah, okay. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on the differences between a table view and a collection view? No. Okay. Just to reiterate, a flow layout is required for a collection view. So for a table view, because the flow is basically only vertically, you don't have to initialize a flow layout. But if you're using a collection view, you have to define a flow layout, which is essentially this thing here. And that's how you create this object to use. Okay. The init function of a UICollectionView cell is slightly different. I went over this, and then you must conform to this protocol. So as Richie mentioned earlier, we do have this extra extension here where we define this collection view delegate flow layout, and we must basically tell Xcode like how wide and tall do we want these cells to be, or else there's no way for I guess Xcode to be able to like create these like squares that we saw earlier. And note that we are using I guess Richie used rows here, but it's okay, yeah. We do refer to these things as items instead of rows, but you can call rows as well to get the index. Okay, and that's all we have for the Kahoot. Any questions?
Nice. I don't know why it always times me out.
Wait, me too. Every time
I think I guess like it's me for GM, but
oh, does it only allow one person?
I think only one person's allowed. So I think either like Tony, Ayush, Dennis, or Fumi are kicking us out each time. Whoa.
Wow.
Lag.
It was this that one.
Oh shit. Whoops. I have way too many Gmail accounts. What is this? Okay, there you go.
Perfect. Any questions on the logistics for A3? Just to reiterate, the midpoint is due Tuesday, April 9th, and we won't actually be like grading it for like I guess like correctness, if that makes sense. So you could basically commit one line of code and be fine. But I guess the expectation is that if you want to, I guess, not be hammered with work after spring break, you should technically be like halfway through, and we can give you guys feedback or if you guys have any questions on that. But if you have like a busy spring break and you have plans, it's only counted for completion. So as long as you commit something to your GitHub, you'll get full credit for the midpoint. And I believe the final submission is the week after that. So that's when we'll actually grade it for completion. For actual grade and correctness. Okay.
Alright. Let's see if the music's working. Why so laggy today? There you go. Alright, where's the music at?
Are you on low power mode?
Oh, there it is. There we go. Everyone's joining in, I see. Same.
Wait, is anyone planning to work on A3 over the break and would like office hours over the break? No? Yay. Oh, yeah, okay. I'll like post an. Wait, no. I'm chilling for spring break, so I'm down to help.
It's an ant.
Why is Ant here? No, I'm playing.
Yeah, why is everyone here, bro? Alright, is everyone in? Is someone not in? Good to go?
Wait.
Oh.
Let her cook.
Let her cook. She's cooking.
I don't think there's any memes in this one, actually.
No, yeah,
It's hard to find collection with memes. I don't know why.
There's not a very funny topic.
Yeah.
Like not a problem a lot of us.
Nothing to
Why
meme
is
about.
my net ID up there, bro? Someone's using my net ID. Okay, alright, let's go. Okay, when is the midpoint for A3 dinner?
I feel like I could make these better answers.
I think so. These are good though.
They're a little complex.
This is the midpoint, not the final submission. Keep in mind. Yep, so keep in mind the midpoint is the Tuesday after spring break, and to reiterate, this will be for completion, but we recommend getting quite a bit done so you can get some feedback on that. And keep in mind, there is no actual submission. It's more so you push something to GitHub, and we'll check that manually on that date. Okay, nice.
Feb and Keb.
Feb. The init function of a UI collection view cell is the same as that of a UI table view cell.
Oh no, there's nothing. Oops.
The classroom.
50-50.
Oh wait, I think it just goes to the timer.
Oh really? It doesn't.
Oh damn. Okay. So keep in mind, it is not exactly the same. The initializer is actually the one thing that is different about the UI collection view and the UI table view cell. So again, I guess I can go into that a little bit, just real quick. So keep in mind, yeah. So in our initializer here, we only have the frame, whereas with our initializer before with the table view, there is a lot more parameters that we have there. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The only thing different between them is actually the initializer. Okay. Nice, nice. If I wanted to build a view like this, I could use a blank.
Keyword could.
Could.
So.
Dude, the remix
Oh
is
my
real.
God, the remix. Different remix every time.
That's not our feed. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, most people got that. Yep, so with this view, you can actually use either a collection view or a table view because there's actually no spacing between each of the items and there's only one item per row. So in this case, we can actually use both a UI collection view or a table view. Oh, nice. Okay.
Consistent.
If I wanted to build a view like this, we would use there's only 22 people. Let's just skip. Okay, yep. So exactly, because there's sort of inter-item spacing and we have multiple items per row, we actually do want to use a collection view in this case. Oh, okay. I think there's one more.
That
Right?
one. It's the
True or
last one.
false? A flow layout is required for a collection view.
Wow. What was that? You hear the sound of music just now?
Yeah, it's going crazy. Except one person. Or not.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, so a flow layout is required because in order to actually create the collection view, we need to call that constructor, which again before, if you go back to view controller, you'll see that when we call the constructor for the collection view, right here, you'll see that the collection view layout is actually required in the constructor. So that's why we actually cannot define the collection view right out here, is because we have this layout that we cannot define elsewhere besides the view did load or in any other function. Okay, nice. Let's see the scoreboard. It's probably going to do the glitch thing again.
Oh, you're right. It's a consistently glitch.
Okay, okay.
PJ. Nice.
Yeah. I don't know why it always does this. You
Epilepsy one.
gotta fix that.
Noise. Yay.
Nice job, nice job. Alright.
I don't think there's any to-dos. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Let's
just
just close that out. Yep, so I guess like there's not really any to-dos since, lecture is sort of pretty far away for the next one. Just if you want to get started on A3, it may be a good idea. Just keep in mind the deadline. And otherwise, everyone have a great spring break.